My dad's voice thundered down the hall. Who stole my $20,000? I froze, but it wasn't me. It was my sister standing there, shopping bags spilling across the rug, smirking like it was a game. That was the moment everything changed. My name is Hannah Clarke. I'm 27 years old, and before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. For as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible one. It's not a title you earn with a single grand gesture. It's one you accumulate over 1,000 small, thankless moments. It's the title given to the child who reminds her parents to pay the electric bill. The one who learns how to fix a running toilet from online videos because the sound is keeping her up at night. The one who automatically starts cleaning the kitchen after a chaotic family dinner while everyone else is laughing in the living room. It's a role that was assigned to me so early, I can't recall a time before it. I work at the Port of Long Beach, a sprawling universe of steel and water. My office is a small, prefabricated box stacked on top of another, with a window that looks out onto a sea of shipping containers, red, blue, green, and rust-colored boxes that hold the world's commerce in their corrugated bellies. The air here has a permanent taste of salt and diesel. The soundtrack of my life is the groan of cranes lifting impossible weights, the distant horns of ships arriving from Asia, and the constant, urgent beeping of trucks backing up. It's not a glamorous world, but it's an honest one. I'm a logistics coordinator, which is a fancy way of saying I'm a professional problem solver. I sit at the intersection of international law, transportation, and pure, unadulterated chaos. My job is to make sure a shipment of iPhones from Shenzhen doesn't get held up in customs for a week because of a single typo on Form 7501. There's a strange, deep satisfaction in it. It's a world of rules, of precision, of cause and effect. In my world, if you do the work correctly, you get the right result. There are no favorites, no excuses. The container either clears customs or it doesn't. I find comfort in that certainty. This job, this life of meticulous order, is all a means to an end. Every paycheck, every grueling overtime shift during the holiday rush is another small step towards my real dream, my own consulting firm, Clarke Logistics. I can see it in my mind's eye with perfect clarity. A clean, minimalist office, not in a box, but in a real building, with a large glass window overlooking the very port where I now toil. I want to help small businesses, the artisans and entrepreneurs who have a great product but are intimidated by the labyrinth of global trade. I've seen them get crushed by shipping costs and complex regulations that bigger companies handle with ease. I want to be their guide, their advocate. My nights are not for bars or parties. My nights are for study. My small bedroom is filled with textbooks on maritime law, import-export compliance, and supply chain management. My laptop is filled with drafts of business plans, financial projections, and marketing strategies. My savings account, which I check daily, is the most sacred thing I own. It grows at a glacial pace, but every dollar in it is a testament to my discipline. My life is a carefully constructed tower of sacrifice. My 10-year-old car, my wardrobe of practical, unexciting clothes, my diet of home-cooked, budget-friendly meals, they are all choices. They are the price of my dream, and I pay it without complaint. And then there is my sister, Sabrina. Sabrina lives in a world I cannot comprehend, a world where the laws of cause and effect do not seem to apply. 2 years younger than me, she floats through life on a cloud of charm, beauty, and willful ignorance. While I was building a career, she was building a social media following. While I was saving for the future, she was spending on the now. She's had more jobs than I can count. A hostess at a trendy restaurant until she got tired of the hours. A clerk in a boutique until she had a fight with the manager. A yoga instructor's assistant until she decided she wasn't a morning person. None of them last. They are merely inconvenient interludes in her real life, which consists of brunches, parties, and weekend getaways. To my parents, this isn't a flaw. It's her essence. My quiet, steady ambition is seen as, well, it's mostly not seen at all. It's just Hannah being Hannah. It's predictable, reliable, and therefore uninteresting. My successes are met with the same mild approval one might give to a well-behaved pet. A promotion at work earned me a, "That's nice, dear." Is it a lot more work? Passing a difficult customs brokerage exam got me a distracted, "Good for you, honey." But Sabrina is a spectacle. She is the star of a never-ending show, and my parents are her most devoted audience. Her stories, always dramatic and self-centered, are the main event at every family gathering. Her chaotic love life, her squabbles with friends, her latest fleeting passion, they listen, enthralled. Their faces a mixture of amusement and adoration. "Oh, that's Sabrina," my mom will say, laughing, after Sabrina recounts a story about how she impulsively booked a non-refundable trip she couldn't afford. She has such a spirit for adventure. Her irresponsibility is reframed as spontaneity. Her lack of direction is called finding herself. Their financial support is the invisible engine that powers her carefree life. $100 here for a new outfit, $200 there to cover her car insurance. It flows from them to her with the ease of conversation. They never call it a handout. It's always just helping her out. They have shielded her from every consequence, cushioned every fall, until she no longer understands that actions are supposed to have reactions. I remember a specific incident from when we were teenagers. I had saved for 6 months, working a part-time job at a grocery store, to buy my first decent laptop for school. It cost me nearly $1,000, every cent earned bagging groceries. I treasured it. A few weeks after I got it, Sabrina borrowed it without asking to watch a movie in her room. She spilled a can of soda all over the keyboard, frying the motherboard. When I found it sticky and dead, I was devastated. Sabrina's response was a flippant, "Oops, it was an accident." When I told our parents, hoping for some justice, some acknowledgement of the loss, my father sighed and said, "Well, Hannah, you know how clumsy your sister can be. You should have been more careful about leaving it where she could get it." My mother, trying to be the peacemaker, offered a solution. "I'll give you a couple $100 towards a new one." It wasn't about the money. It was the principle. Sabrina had destroyed my property, something I had worked incredibly hard for, and not only was she not held accountable, but I was somehow assigned partial blame. In the end, I spent the rest of the year using the slow, ancient computers at the school library. Sabrina faced no punishment. The incident was never spoken of again. That was the pattern. My responsibility was weaponized against me, while her irresponsibility was coddled and excused. My strength meant I didn't need help. Her perceived weakness meant she deserved all of it. Over the years, I learned to stop expecting fairness. I built walls around my heart, poured my energy into my work, and told myself that my success would be its own reward. I didn't need their validation. I just needed to survive long enough to build my own life, far away from the gravitational pull of their dysfunctional solar system, where Sabrina was the sun and I was a distant, forgotten moon. But the pull was stronger than I knew, and I was about to be dragged into the heart of the fire. My life was a symphony of routine, a carefully composed piece of music that I played every single day. The first note was the shrill cry of my 5:30 a.m. alarm, a sound that meant the start of another day of focused, relentless effort. Before the sun even thought about rising, I would be in the kitchen, the only light coming from the small lamp above the stove. The smell of freshly brewed coffee was my solitary morning comfort. While my parents slept in their room and Sabrina was lost in whatever dream world she inhabited, I was already preparing for the day ahead. I'd pack my lunch, a sensible salad or leftovers from the night before, fill my thermos, and slip out the front door, my footsteps silent on the driveway. The commute to the port was a slow crawl, a 45-minute journey through a concrete labyrinth of freeways. I used the time productively, listening to podcasts about global economics or audiobooks on business leadership. My car was my classroom. By the time I arrived at my small, cluttered office, my mind was already sharp, already focused on the dozen problems that would have inevitably cropped up overnight. A shipment of medical supplies stuck on a ship quarantined in Singapore. A container of textiles that had been misrouted to Rotterdam instead of Richmond. A frantic client whose perishable goods were about to expire in a hot container in the yard. My day was a relentless series of fires to be put out. I thrived on it. I loved the challenge of untangling the knots, of finding a solution where others saw only a dead end. There was a clean, satisfying logic to it that was completely absent from my life at home. When my 10 or 11-hour shift was over, I would drive back through the evening traffic, my mind still churning with shipping codes and vessel schedules. The transition from the structured chaos of my job to the unstructured chaos of my home was always jarring. I would walk in the door to a house that felt neglected. A pair of Sabrina's expensive shoes would be kicked off in the middle of the hallway. The mail would be scattered on the kitchen counter, unopened. Half-empty glasses and bowls would be littered around the living room, evidence of her day of leisure. She would usually be in her room, the door closed, the muffled beat of some trendy music pulsing through the wood. She was like a tourist in our home, someone who enjoyed the amenities but took no responsibility for the upkeep. That responsibility, like all the others, fell to me. I was the one who would gather the stray dishes, who would sort through the mail, who would notice that the trash needed to be taken out. I was the home's silent, unpaid manager. One evening, I came home to find the internet wasn't working. In our house, this was a minor crisis. My dad couldn't watch his streaming shows, and Sabrina emerged from her room looking utterly lost. "Why isn't the Wi-Fi working?" she whined, as if it had personally offended her. "I have to post something." My dad fiddled with the router for a few minutes, unplugged it, plugged it back in, and then gave up with a frustrated sigh. "I'll call the company in the morning," he said. I knew that meant I would be the one calling the company, spending an hour on hold, and then trying to explain the problem. So, I spent the next 2 hours on my phone, methodically going through troubleshooting forums. I tried everything, resetting the router to factory settings, reconfiguring the IP address, checking the physical line outside. Finally, I discovered the problem. The bill hadn't been paid. Sabrina had been in charge of paying it that month, a rare responsibility assigned to her. She had been given the cash for it, but it had clearly been spent on something else. When I confronted her, she just shrugged. "Oh, I totally forgot," she said without a hint of apology. I ended up paying the overdue bill myself online with my credit card, just to get the service restored. The $200 was never paid back. My parents never even asked about it. The next day, the internet was working again, and everyone was happy. No one asked how. The problem had simply gone away. This was the texture of my life. I was the fixer of all things, big and small. My contributions were invisible because they were preventative. I solved problems before they became crises. My reward for this constant vigilance was to be taken for granted. My achievements were quiet, and in our family, quiet was synonymous with non-existent. The contrast was never starker than at family dinners. I remember one Sunday I was particularly proud. I had just successfully negotiated a major shipping contract for a new client at work, a deal that would bring in a huge amount of revenue and had earned me a personal commendation from my boss. I tried to share the news at the dinner table. "I had a really big win at work this week," I began. "That's nice, dear," my mom said, passing the mashed potatoes. Before I could say another word, Sabrina launched into a story. "Oh my God, you guys will not believe what happened to me today. So I was at that cute little coffee shop downtown, and this guy comes up to me. He was a model, I'm pretty sure. And he told me I had the most amazing energy he'd ever seen and asked if he could take my picture for his portfolio. Instantly, all attention shifted to her. My dad chuckled. "Well, he's not wrong about that." My mom leaned forward, her eyes wide. "A model? Sabrina, tell me everything. What did he look like? Did you get his number?" For the next 20 minutes, they dissected every detail of her trivial encounter, while my professional achievement was left hanging in the air, forgotten. I just sat there, pushing food around on my plate, a ghost at my own family's table. It wasn't that they were cruel people. It was a blindness, a form of selective attention they had cultivated over decades. They saw the life they wanted to see. They saw a dazzling, exciting daughter who lived a life full of stories. And they saw another daughter who was there, the workhorse, the engine that ran quietly in the background, ensuring the show could go on. I told myself it didn't matter. I had my spreadsheet, my savings account, my meticulously crafted 5-year plan. Their applause wasn't a prerequisite for my success, but the constant, grinding friction of being overlooked was wearing me down. It was like being slowly eroded by the tide, one small wave of disregard at a time. I was becoming smaller and smaller in my own home, and I was terrified that one day I would disappear completely. The morning it all unraveled began with a rare moment of connection with my father. He was usually a man of few words, especially in the morning, but on this day he sought me out, a look of mild panic on his face. It was a Tuesday, gray and threatening rain. I was by the front door pulling on my work boots when he hurried over. "Hannah, thank God you're still here." "I need a huge favor," he said, running a hand through his hair. "It's your mother's birthday next week, and I found the perfect watch for her online. You know the one she pointed out a month ago? But this website, it's a mess. It keeps timing out. I know you're the expert with this stuff. I was the family's tech support, their financial administrator, their personal researcher. This was a role I was used to." "Sure, Dad, no problem," I said. "Just email me the link, and I'll take care of it when I get home tonight." "Even better," he said, relief washing over his face. He pulled his wallet out of his back pocket and retrieved his main credit card, the one with the high limit reserved for serious purchases. He then grabbed a junk mail envelope from the small table by the door and scribbled the pin on the back of it with a pen. "Here, just use this. I've already created an account and put the watch in the shopping cart. All you have to do is log in and hit confirm purchase." He held the card and the envelope out to me. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, not just relief, but genuine gratitude. "I'm putting this on your desk, right by your keyboard, so it doesn't get lost in the shuffle," he said, walking into my room and placing it carefully in the center of my workspace. As he walked back out, he clapped me on the shoulder. "You're a lifesaver, Han. You're the only one I can count on for this kind of thing. You're the responsible one." That little phrase, "the responsible one," echoed in my ears as I drove to work. For once, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a compliment. It felt like recognition. The warmth of that small moment carried me through a difficult and stressful day at the port. A massive storm in the South China Sea had thrown half the Pacific shipping schedule into chaos, and I spent 10 hours on the phone, rerouting vessels and placating frantic clients. By the time I left the office, my brain was fried. I got home late, exhausted and hungry. The promise I'd made to my dad was the furthest thing from my mind. It wasn't until after I'd eaten a quick dinner and was getting ready for bed that I saw it. The credit card and the envelope, sitting exactly where he had left them on my desk, illuminated by the glow of my computer monitor. I sighed. It would only take a minute. I sat down, booted up the computer, and navigated to the jewelry store's website. I found the login page and entered my dad's email and password. Sure enough, there in the shopping cart was a beautiful, elegant silver watch I knew my mom would absolutely adore. I smiled, thinking of how happy she would be. I clicked the button that said "Proceed to checkout." The page refreshed, and I entered the credit card information as my dad had instructed. I typed in the number, the expiration date, the security code. I double-checked everything and then clicked Confirm Purchase. I expected to see a confirmation screen. Instead, a glaring red banner appeared at the top of the page. Payment declined. The issuing bank has declined this transaction. Please try a different payment method or contact your bank for more information. I frowned. That was impossible. I knew for a fact that my dad kept this card clear for emergencies and big purchases. It must be a glitch with the website, just as he'd said. I decided to check the account balance directly. I opened a new tab, went to the bank's website, and used the card number and the PIN he had written down to log in. The account summary page loaded. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process the numbers on the screen. The credit limit was $20,000. The amount listed under available credit was $1,734. My breath caught in my throat. I felt a cold, sick feeling spread through my stomach. It wasn't a glitch. The card was completely, utterly maxed out. My hand was trembling as I clicked to view the recent transactions. The page that loaded was a timeline of a frantic, high-end shopping spree. It had all happened today, between the hours of 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. While I had been wrestling with international shipping crises, someone had been living out a fantasy. The charges were breathtaking in their audacity. The first was for $3,845.22 at a designer handbag store in Beverly Hills. The next, a few minutes later, was from a luxury shoe boutique down the street for $2,560. Then came a charge from a high-fashion clothing store for $411,075. My mind reeled. Who would do this? I thought for a moment it must be fraud, that the card number had been stolen. But then I scrolled down further. There was a charge from an airline for $3,280. I clicked on the details. It was for a first-class one-way ticket from LAX to John Wayne Airport in Orange County, a ridiculously short flight to take first class. The passenger's name was listed clearly, Sabrina Clarke. My blood ran cold. It wasn't fraud. It was theft. The final charge was the biggest, a reservation at a 5-star oceanfront resort in Huntington Beach. The charge was for $6,050 for a 5-night stay in a junior suite with an ocean view. The confirmation email for the booking had been sent to an address I recognized, Sabrina's personal email. The card had been on my desk, in my room, in our house. The only other person home all day had been Sabrina. Just as this devastating realization solidified, my bedroom door swung open without a knock. Sabrina breezed in, her face alight with a giddy, triumphant smile. She was wearing a new, ridiculously expensive-looking sundress, and she was surrounded by a cloud of new, cloyingly sweet perfume. She was holding an armful of glossy shopping bags from the very stores I had just seen listed on the bank statement. "You are not going to believe the day I had," she exclaimed, dropping the bags onto my floor. The contents spilled out in a cascade of tissue paper and high-end logos. I was feeling so down this morning, so I decided to treat myself. I just needed a change of scenery, you know? So I booked a little solo vacation for myself. I'm leaving for a week at the beach tomorrow morning, a little resort in Huntington. I totally deserve it. I couldn't find my voice. I was paralyzed, caught between a tidal wave of rage and a vortex of despair. I just stared at her smiling face, at the stolen merchandise littering my floor. She was basking in the glow of a crime she had committed, and she had used me, my room, my desk, the trust my father had placed in me, as the crime scene. She finally registered my shocked silence. Her smile tightened. "What is your problem?" she asked, her tone shifting from giddy to annoyed. "Can't you just be happy for me for once?" Slowly, deliberately, I turned my computer monitor so that she could see the screen. I watched her eyes scan the bank statement. I saw the flicker of recognition, followed not by shame or remorse, but by a flash of irritation. It was the look of someone who had been enjoying a wonderful dream and was angry at being woken up. She had been caught, and her only emotion seemed to be annoyance that her fun was over. In that moment, looking at her smug, unrepentant face, I felt a kind of hatred so pure and so intense, it almost took my breath away. The hour that followed was the longest of my life. I sat in the silent tomb of my room, the glowing screen of the bank statement casting a sickly blue light on my face. Every outrageous charge felt like a personal insult, a deliberate mockery of every sacrifice I had ever made. Sabrina had retreated to her own room, and after a few minutes, I heard the faint, muffled thump of music start up. The sound was so jarringly normal, so audaciously carefree, that it felt like a form of psychological warfare. She was not contrite. She was not afraid. She was simply waiting for the inconvenience of her actions to be smoothed over by our parents, as it always had been. I felt trapped in the quiet before a hurricane, the air thick and heavy with impending destruction. The sound of my father's car pulling into the driveway at 7 p.m. was like a starter pistol. The storm was here. I heard the front door open and his familiar footsteps in the hall. "Hey, hon!" he called out, his voice tired from a long day. "Did you manage to order that watch for your mom?" My body felt like it was encased in lead as I walked out to meet him in the living room. I couldn't speak. The words were lodged in my throat, a hard lump of anger and shame. My expression must have been a horror show, because the weariness in his face was immediately replaced by a sharp concern. "What is it? What's wrong?" At that exact moment, as if summoned by the drama, Sabrina emerged from her room. She had changed into another one of her new outfits. A pair of designer jeans and a silk top that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. She leaned against the doorframe, a picture of casual nonchalance, watching us. "The card," I finally managed to choke out. "When I went to buy the watch, it was declined." My father's brows knitted together in confusion. "Declined? That's impossible. I just paid it off last month. There should be thousands available." He started walking towards my room, perhaps to see the error message for himself. I followed him, a silent, unwilling executioner leading him to the gallows of his own trust. Sabrina trailed behind us, a curious spectator at a car crash she had caused. My mother, hearing the rising tension in our voices, appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. My dad stood in front of my computer, and I pointed to the screen. He leaned in, his eyes scanning the account summary first. I saw his shoulders stiffen. I watched his gaze drop down to the list of transactions, his finger tracing the line items one by one. The silence in the room was absolute, stretching for what felt like an eternity. His face, which had been confused, slowly transformed. It was like watching a storm gather on a human face. First came the clouds of disbelief, then the darkening of pure shock, and finally, the lightning flash of white-hot fury. He straightened up, his whole body rigid, and slowly turned his head until his eyes locked on Sabrina. "Sabrina," he said. His voice was terrifyingly calm, each syllable a perfectly formed piece of ice. "What did you do?" This was the moment. My mother, poised in the doorway, tensed. This was her cue, the part in the play where she would rush in to smooth things over, to offer excuses, to soften the blow. I braced myself for it, but Sabrina spoke first, and her words were a masterpiece of deflection. She didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She just shrugged, a small, insolent gesture that sent a shockwave through the room. "What?" she said, her voice laced with manufactured innocence. The card was just sitting there, out in the open, on her desk. The pin was written down right next to it. "It's not like I had to break into a safe. How is this all my fault?" The sheer, unmitigated gall of her statement was breathtaking. She was admitting to the theft while simultaneously absolving herself of all responsibility. She was framing her crime as a simple lapse in judgment, an accident of opportunity, for which we all shared the blame. My father's composure shattered. The icy calm erupted into a volcano of rage. "My fault?" he roared, his voice cracking with disbelief. The sound echoed through our small house, rattling the pictures on the walls. You stole $20,000 and you have the nerve to suggest it's my fault for trusting my own daughter? I didn't steal it, she yelled back, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. I was just borrowing it. I was going to pay it back. Pay it back with what? He bellowed, taking a step towards her. Your imaginary fortune? You don't have a job. You don't have savings. You have nothing but expensive taste and a complete disregard for anyone but yourself. You bought a first-class plane ticket to fly 40 miles. Do you think we're stupid? My mother stood frozen, her face ashen. The excuse she might have offered, she made a mistake, was useless here. This wasn't a mistake. This was a calculated, deliberate, and catastrophic act of betrayal. The scale of it was too immense to be excused. Her silence was a concession, an admission that she had no defense left. Seeing that she was losing, Sabrina did what she always did. She went on the attack. She turned her fury on me, her eyes narrowing into venomous slits. This is your fault, she screamed, her finger jabbing the air in my direction. You did this to me. You hate me. You've always been jealous that Mom and Dad love me more. You probably left the card out on purpose, hoping I'd see it. You wanted me to get in trouble so you could finally look like the perfect daughter for once in your miserable, boring life. The accusation was so vile, so completely divorced from reality, that for a second, I felt the wind get knocked out of me. She was trying to drag me down with her, to muddy the waters with lies and poison, to make me a co-conspirator in my own violation. But the shock quickly gave way to a cold, hard rage. I had been quiet for too long. You're a liar, Sabrina, I said, my voice low and steady, cutting through her hysterics. I had anticipated this. While waiting for my dad to come home, I hadn't just sat there in a panic. I had prepared. I had printed out every single digital receipt. I walked to my desk, picked up the neat stack of papers and laid them out on the bed one by one, like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. Here, I said, my voice gaining strength. Here is the receipt from the shoe store, with a confirmation sent to your email address. Spreezy98. Here is the shipping confirmation for the clothes, with the delivery address listed as this house. Attention Sabrina Clarke. Here is the airline e-ticket, with your name, your birthday, your frequent flyer number. And here's the hotel reservation, also confirmed to your email, for a non-refundable suite. I looked up from the papers and straight into her eyes. You didn't just use a card, Sabrina. You wove a digital tapestry of your guilt. You tied your name, your email, your entire identity to every single dollar you stole. So you tell me, how could I have possibly set you up? The color drained from Sabrina's face. The lies, which had been her shield and sword for her entire life, were useless against the cold, hard wall of digital proof. She was cornered, exposed, and stripped of all her defenses. She looked desperately towards our mother, her eyes pleading for a rescue that she had to know was not coming. My mother just shook her head slowly, a single tear tracing a path down her pale cheek. She looked away, unable to bear the sight of her daughter's true character, laid bare under the harsh light of the truth. My father, who had been listening in stony silence, finally spoke again. His voice was no longer shouting. It was heavy, filled with the weight of a lifetime of broken trust. You're going to pay it all back, Sabrina, he said. Every single cent. Her mouth opened, a protest forming on her lips, but no sound came out. She just stared at him, at all of us. The smirking, confident girl from a few hours ago completely gone, replaced by a cornered, desperate stranger. In that moment, the dysfunctional fairy tale our family had been living in for decades finally came to a crashing, brutal end. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation was a thick, unbreathable fog of misery. The shouting had ended, but the silence that replaced it was far more punishing. It was a silence filled with the shrapnel of broken things, broken trust, broken illusions, broken hearts. My father locked himself in his den, the heavy thud of the closing door a clear message. He was done. My mother drifted around the downstairs of the house like a wraith, picking things up and putting them down, her hands trembling, her face a mask of grief. It was the grief of a woman who had just been forced to see her child not as the perfect angel she had imagined, but as the deeply flawed stranger she truly was. Sabrina remained barricaded in her room, the silence from behind her door a sullen, resentful void. I retreated to my own room, but there was no escape. The events of the evening churned in my mind, a toxic cocktail of fury, validation, and a profound, hollowing sadness. I had won. The truth was out, but the victory felt sickeningly empty. My family, already a fractured and dysfunctional thing, had been shattered, and I was the one holding the hammer. As I sat there, staring at the business plans on my desk, The neat columns of figures, the hopeful projections. A lifetime of suppressed memories began to surface, each one a small piece of the puzzle that had led to this night. I remembered being 10 years old and spending an entire month saving my allowance to buy a specific video game. The day I finally bought it, Sabrina had a tantrum because she wanted a new doll. My parents, to appease her, had taken my new game and returned it to the store to buy her the doll, promising to buy me the game again on my birthday, which was 6 months away. They never did. I remembered being in high school, working tirelessly to get straight A's, only to have my report card tacked to the fridge with a single magnet, while a blurry second-place ribbon Sabrina had won in a casual school art show was framed and hung in the living room. Her mediocre effort was a masterpiece. My consistent excellence was just wallpaper. I thought of all the money, the small, seemingly insignificant amounts that had flowed from me to her over the years. The $20 for gas so she could go to a party, the $50 to help her buy a concert ticket, the $100 I'd lent her for a security deposit on an apartment she'd abandoned 2 months later. It was never paid back, never acknowledged. I was not a sister. I was a resource. I was the emergency fund she could tap when her primary investors, our parents, were unavailable. And as I sat there, connecting these painful dots, a truly terrifying thought began to form. I had felt a grim satisfaction in presenting the undeniable digital proof of her guilt. But what if there hadn't been any? What if she had been smarter, using cash she'd withdrawn, or booking things under a fake name? What if it had just been my word against her tearful, manipulative performance? The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They could have turned on me. I could see the scene playing out with perfect, horrifying clarity. Sabrina, weeping, claiming she was being framed by her jealous, bitter sister. My mother, desperate to believe in the daughter she had so carefully constructed, would have looked for any other explanation. My father, angry and betrayed, would have needed someone to blame. And who better than me? The responsible one? Hannah, you were the one I gave the card to. You were in charge of it. Your sister is flighty, you know that. You should have been more careful. This is your responsibility too. My reliability, my competence, the very traits that made me useful to them, also made me the perfect fall guy. I was the family's built-in insurance policy. I could be counted on to clean up the mess, and if necessary, I could be counted on to take the blame. I had been standing on a precipice and hadn't even realized it. Sabrina's recklessness hadn't just exposed her. It had exposed my own terrifying vulnerability. I looked around my small room, at the life I was trying so hard to build. The textbooks, the neatly filed paperwork, the whiteboard where I'd mapped out my goals for the next 5 years. This was my sanctuary, the one place where I had control. But the chaos from the rest of the house was seeping under the door. It was a flood, and I was using a bucket to bail out a sinking ship. My family was not just an emotional drain. They were a direct threat to my future. As long as I remained a part of this system, I would always be at risk. They would bleed me dry emotionally and financially. One emergency, one mistake, one favor at a time, until my dreams were as dead as Sabrina's morals. The deep, aching sadness that had filled my chest began to cool and harden, crystallizing into something new. It was a cold, sharp, and utterly clear resolve. The dynamic of our family was a disease, and I had been a willing participant in my own infection for years, telling myself it was love, telling myself it was duty. But it wasn't. It was poison. I would not let them drag me down. I would not let Sabrina's recklessness become my liability. I would not let my parents' willful blindness dictate the terms of my life. This was not just about the $20,000. That was just a symptom. This was about the disease. My father's demand for repayment was a good start, but I knew it was a foundation of sand. His anger would cool. My mother's sympathy would return. Sabrina would charm and cry and manipulate her way back into their good graces. And in a few months, the debt would be forgiven and forgotten. Another messy incident swept under the rug. No, not this time. This time, I would build the foundation myself, and I would build it out of concrete and steel. There would be no more unspoken rules, no more emotional blackmail, no more blurred lines of responsibility. From now on, there would only be clear, unbreakable terms. I stood up and walked to my computer. The decision was made. I was done being the family's shock absorber. I was going to become the architect of a new reality, whether they liked it or not. The first light of dawn was filtering through my blinds when I finally finished. I had been up all night, fueled by a potent combination of coffee and cold fury. But my actions were not born of rage. They were born of a chillingly clear logic. While the rest of my family slept, wrestling with their own demons of guilt, anger, and resentment. I was building a cage of consequences. My computer screen glowed in the dark room, displaying the document I had painstakingly crafted. At the top, in stark bold letters, were the words, "Binding Repayment Agreement." I had channeled every ounce of my professional expertise into its creation. My job was to read the fine print, to understand contracts, to ensure that every contingency was accounted for. I applied that same meticulous rigor to this family crisis. I researched contract law basics on legal websites, learning the language of obligation and default. I defined the debtor, Sabrina Clarke, and the creditor, our father, with sterile precision. The amount owed was not a round number. It was the exact documented sum of her theft, 20,347.18. Every cent would be accounted for. The core of the document was the repayment schedule. I calculated it carefully. I researched average wages for unskilled full-time labor in our area. I created a payment plan that was designed to be the maximum possible amount someone earning. That wage could pay while still covering basic necessities, like a bus pass and a share of household utilities, a new expense I planned to see enforced. The monthly payment was a brutal, unforgiving number. It would leave no room for luxuries, no money for nights out, no possibility of recreating her old life. It was a financial straitjacket. I included clauses that were ironclad. A 5% late fee would be applied if a payment was more than 3 calendar days overdue. A missed payment constituted a warning. 2 consecutive missed payments constituted a default, at which point the entire remaining balance would become immediately due and payable. I added a final sentence stating that in the event of a default, the creditor reserved the right to pursue all available legal remedies, including civil court action, to recover the debt. The last part I added was the signature section. There were lines for Sabrina and my father, of course, but I also added a third line, beneath which I typed, "Acknowledged and witnessed by." This was for my mother. Her signature would be her formal abdication of the role of family peacemaker and excuse-maker. It would be her legally binding testament that she endorsed this new era of accountability. I printed 3 copies, the printer whirring to life in the quiet house, spitting out the pages that would codify our family's reckoning. I waited until 8 a.m. I walked into the kitchen where my parents were sitting in a heavy, exhausted silence, nursing mugs of coffee. Sabrina was not there. I placed the 3 copies of the agreement and a single black pen in the center of the kitchen table. My dad picked one up, his brow furrowed. He read through the first page, then the second. I watched his expression change from weary anger to a kind of grim appreciation. He, a man who ran a small business, understood the language of contracts. He understood the cold, hard logic of numbers on a page. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice rough. "I wrote it," I said simply. He looked at me then, a long, appraising look. It was a look of pure, unadulterated respect, something I had been starving for my entire life. "This is thorough," he said, a slight nod, his only other sign of approval. He took the pen without another word and signed his name on the creditor line of all 3 copies. The motion was firm, decisive. He then slid a copy across the table to my mother. She stared at it, her hand hovering over the paper. This was her moment of betrayal, or her moment of strength. She was not just a witness. She was choosing a side. She was choosing between the comfortable lie of the past and the painful truth of the present. Her eyes welled with tears, but she did not cry. She took the pen, and with a hand that trembled only slightly, she signed her name. "Now for the hard part," my dad muttered. "Sabrina," he called out, his voice echoing down the hall. A few minutes later, she appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face a sullen mask of defiance. She saw the papers on the table, saw our solemn faces, and her eyes narrowed. "What is that?" she asked, her voice hostile. "This is your repayment contract," I said, my tone neutral. "It outlines the terms by which you will pay Dad back for the money you took." She snatched a copy from the table and her eyes flew across the page. As she read, her face went from sullen to pale with shock, then to a blotchy, furious red. "You're insane," she shrieked, throwing the papers down. "This is a joke. There is no way I am signing this piece of garbage. You can't control my life." "I'm not," I replied calmly. "Your dad is. This document is just the map. Sign the paper, Sabrina," my dad said, his voice flat and hard. It was not a request. It was an order. "No, I won't. You can't make me," she screamed, turning her rage on him. "This is monstrous. Hannah is a vindictive monster and you're letting her do this to me." She then turned to our mother, her last hope. "Mom, please, don't let them do this." My mother looked at her, her face a portrait of agony. "Sabrina, honey," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You did this. You have to fix it." The rejection from her staunchest ally seemed to break something in Sabrina. Her rage collapsed into a storm of desperate, manipulative tears. "You all hate me," she sobbed, sinking into a chair. "You just want to punish me. You want me to be miserable like her?" She spat, gesturing wildly at me. But the tears, her most reliable weapon for so long, had lost their power. The spell was broken. My dad stood up and walked over to her. He did not hug her. He did not comfort her. He looked down at her and said, in a voice that was both sad and immovable, "You have two choices. You sign that contract and you get a full-time job and you start paying back what you stole. Or you can pack a bag and you can be out of my house by noon today. There is no other option." The finality of his words silenced her. She stared up at him, her tear-streaked face a mask of disbelief, finally comprehending that her world had been irrevocably altered. The safety net was gone. The open arms had closed. She was, for the first time in her life, completely and totally cornered. With a final, choked sob of pure hatred, she snatched the pen from the table. Her signature on the debtor line was not a name. It was a violent, angry gash across the paper, a testament to her utter defeat. I calmly gathered the signed documents. I gave a copy to my dad and slid my own into a protective folder. I left the third copy on the table in front of her. It was her map, her cage, her new reality. I walked out of the kitchen, not looking back, the folder in my hand feeling as heavy and as final as a gravestone. Sabrina's new life began with the jarring, humbling reality of a job hunt. Her thin resume, a testament to her life of leisure, was met with a series of polite rejections. The charm that had always worked so effortlessly in social settings was utterly ineffective on overworked hiring managers who cared more about employment history than they did about a pretty smile. The panic that had flickered in her eyes during the contract signing returned, this time as a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety. She was a week into my father's 2-week deadline when she finally found a job, not through a successful interview, but through a temp agency that sent warm bodies to fill undesirable positions. She was assigned to the night shift at a massive warehouse and distribution center on the industrial edge of the city. It was a world away from the trendy boutiques and cafes she used to frequent. Her new workplace was a cavernous, soulless building that smelled of dust, diesel exhaust, and cheap coffee. Her job was mind-numbingly repetitive. Stand in one place for 8 hours, scanning barcodes and placing items into boxes as they moved past her on a conveyor belt. The work was physically demanding. She came home each morning just as I was leaving for work, her face pale and drawn, her feet swollen. She would complain bitterly about her back aching, about how her hands were getting calluses. My parents would listen with a sad, detached sympathy, but they offered no solutions, no rescue. This was the life she had bought for $2,347.18. Her first paycheck was a brutal awakening. She held the stub in her hand, staring at the number after taxes and deductions, her expression one of utter disbelief. "This is it?" she whispered to no one in particular. "This is all?" That meager sum, earned through 40 hours of grueling labor, didn't even cover her first monthly repayment. The first of the month arrived with a grim inevitability. My father didn't need to remind her. She knew. She transferred the money to his account electronically, a silent, resentful transaction that left her with barely enough to cover the small amount of rent my father now insisted she pay. The collapse of her social life was swift and total. Her friends, who lived the same carefree, transaction-based existence she had no place in their lives for someone who was permanently broke and exhausted. Invitations to brunch, to parties, to weekend trips would come in via text. Her replies became a monotonous litany of excuses. "Can't, I have to work. Sorry, I'm exhausted. Literally have no money, lol." After a few weeks of this, the invitations dwindled, then stopped altogether. Her phone, which had once been a constant source of social validation, fell silent for long stretches. She was an outcast from the world she had once ruled. She spent her days off mostly in her room, the silence a stark contrast to the constant music and chatter that used to emanate from it. The most poignant evidence of her fall came in small, quiet moments that I observed from a distance. One weekend, I saw her slip out of the house carrying the designer handbag she had been so proud of, the one she'd saved for months to buy a year ago. She returned hours later, her hands empty, her eyes red. She had pawned it. That purse, once the centerpiece of her identity, had been sacrificed to make her repayment. A few weeks later, her expensive leather jacket disappeared. Then the tablet her grandparents had given her for her birthday. She was systematically liquidating her former life, converting her symbols of status into the cold, hard cash of consequence. Each pawned item was another piece of her facade being stripped away, revealing the empty, insecure person beneath. Throughout this slow, painful dismantling, I maintained a careful, deliberate silence. I never once mentioned the payments, her job, or her vanished social life. I treated her with a cool, polite neutrality. My silence was not an act of forgiveness or pity. It was the core of my strategy. I knew that any word from me, whether of scorn or of sympathy, would be twisted into an attack, a way for her to re-engage, to create drama, to make herself the victim again. My silence denied her that oxygen. I was not a participant in her punishment. I was merely an observer. Reality was the one tightening the screws, and it was a far more relentless and impartial force than I could ever be. I would sometimes see her waiting at the bus stop in the early morning darkness as I drove to work, huddled in a thin jacket, looking small and defeated. In those moments, a fleeting ghost of a feeling would pass through me. Not pity, exactly, but a deep, sorrowful acknowledgement of the waste of her potential, the waste of our sisterhood, the waste of the years my parents had spent enabling her. But then I would pull into the port, into the world I had built for myself through hard work and discipline, and the feeling would pass. I had my own life to build. I had set my boundaries, and the most important part of my new job was to diligently, silently guard them. Sabrina's tenure at the warehouse lasted just under 7 months. It was, by a huge margin, the longest she had ever held a single job, but her compliance was only skin deep. Beneath the surface of her new, disciplined life, her old self, the resentful, entitled girl who believed she was meant for better things, was still raging. Her firing was not a single dramatic event, but a slow erosion of her employer's patience. She was consistently 5 or 10 minutes late for her shifts. She was written up for her sullen, uncooperative attitude. She was caught taking unauthorized breaks, hiding in a bathroom stall, scrolling through her phone, a ghost of her former life. The company, which had an endless supply of people willing to do her job without complaint, finally let her go. She announced the news at the dinner table one night, not with shame or fear, but with a strange, defiant exhaustion. It was as if she were saying, "There, I tried your way and it didn't work. Now what are you going to do about it?" She seemed to expect a reprieve, a softening, a return to the old ways, but the parents who had created her no longer existed. My father listened to her story, his face calm and unreadable. When she was finished, he simply nodded. "I see," he said. "Well, your next payment is due in 10 days, and your rent is due on the 1st. You need to find a new job." "I can't," she wailed, the theatrics returning. "It's impossible. No one is hiring. What am I supposed to do?" "That's for you to figure out," my father said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "But you are not going to live in this house for free, and you are not going to stop paying back the money you owe. If you can't find a job here, then you'll have to find one somewhere else. But the terms of our agreement are not changing." That was the final blow. The last door of hope for a parental rescue had been firmly, irrevocably slammed in her face. The fight finally went out of her. She spent the next week in a state of quiet, defeated resignation. She sold her old beat-up car for a few $100s. She packed her life into a single large duffel bag and a backpack, leaving behind a room full of cheap furniture and ghosts of a life she could no longer lead. Her departure was on a gray Tuesday morning. It was surreal in its lack of ceremony. My mother hugged her at the door, a long, silent, tearful embrace. My father stood stiffly by, patting her awkwardly on the shoulder. "Take care of yourself, Sabrina," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. Sabrina just nodded, her eyes fixed on the floor. She looked at me for a moment, her expression a mixture of hatred and something I couldn't quite decipher. Maybe a sliver of grudging respect. She didn't say goodbye. She just turned, walked down the driveway, and didn't look back. We watched until she reached the corner and disappeared from view, on her way to a Greyhound station and a new life in some other state, where she hoped to crash with a friend. The quiet that descended upon our house in her absence was profound. It wasn't an empty quiet. It was a peaceful one. The constant humming tension that had been the background music of our lives for as long as I could remember was simply gone. It was like a chronic headache that you don't realize you have until it finally stops. In this new peace, my parents and I began to slowly, cautiously rebuild our relationships. The conversations were no longer dominated by Sabrina's latest drama. My dad started asking me about my business plans, not just as a polite courtesy, but with genuine interest. He would look over my financial projections, offering surprisingly astute advice from his own experience as a small business owner. He was seeing me, not as his responsible daughter, but as a peer. My mother's healing was quieter. One afternoon, as we were gardening together, she paused and looked at me, her eyes filled with a sad clarity. "I was so terrified," she said softly. "Terrified that if I didn't constantly protect Sabrina, the world would break her. I didn't realize I was breaking you instead." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was honest. And it was more than I had ever hoped for. Freed from the constant drain of my family's chaos, my dream, which had been a slow, arduous climb, suddenly took flight. I took the leap, quit my job at the port, and officially launched Clarke Logistics. I rented a small, affordable office in a building that had a clear view of the harbor. My first few months were terrifying and exhilarating. I worked 18-hour days, networking, cold calling, building my reputation from the ground up. And then, it happened. I landed my first major client. It was a local company that designed and sold high-end furniture, and they were struggling with the complexities of importing their materials from Scandinavia. I spent a week buried in their logistics, untangling their supply chain, and presented them with a new plan that would save them nearly 30% in shipping costs. They were ecstatic. They signed a 1-year contract. I sat in my office after they left, holding the signed contract in my hands. It was worth more than my entire first year's projections. I looked out my window at the massive cranes, moving with such grace and power, and I felt a sense of peace so deep and so profound, it felt like I could finally breathe after years of being underwater. I had never set out for revenge. I had only ever wanted to be free. The contract I held was not just a business agreement. It was a declaration of independence. I had finally reached my destination. If you've ever been blamed for someone else's mistakes or forced to carry their weight while they lived free, drop your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell. More stories like this are coming, and trust me, you don't want to miss them.